The room is still the same after all these years. Dim, hollow, caught in the quiet where nothing breathes and everything remembers. Dust hangs in the stagnant air like suspended ash, untouched since the night it all stopped. In the narrow beam of the investigator's flashlight, the forgotten scene unfolds with a silent gravity. An overturned chair, a cracked lampshade, and a faint smear on the floor where the past seems reluctant to fully fade. The atmosphere feels dense, as if time itself paused here, unwilling to move forward. Every step echoes with the muted insistence of something unfinished. Detective Aaron Vale stands in the doorway, letting the cold stillness settle over him. It has been more than a decade since he last crossed this threshold. The air carries traces of old wood, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, memory perhaps. He breathes in slowly, disciplined, cautious, the way someone revisits a mistake that never stopped haunting them. In the center of the room once lay Aurelia Soren, 28 years old, a name as uncommon as her quiet resilience, a wildlife photographer who lived alone, kept meticulous notebooks, and moved through the world with a steady, thoughtful pace. Her work documented landscapes with a kind of reverence. She preferred silence over noise, details over impressions. People described her as gentle, but distant in ways that felt protective rather than cold. On the night of July 14, 2006, she returned from a field assignment near the Manzano mountains. By morning, she was found here, inside her small adobe home on the outskirts of Moriarty, lying beside her scattered camera gear, lifeless, the scene bearing no clear signs of struggle. No forced entry, no missing items, no obvious motive. The investigation stalled, then cooled, then disappeared into files that yellowed quietly in storage. Vale crouches near the faint mark on the wooden floorboards where Aurelia's camera bag had once been found. He touches nothing, only studies, as if the air retains the shape of evidence long removed. His breath leaves a thin frost on the beam of his light. The silence presses in, heavy enough to feel deliberate. He remembers the first time he walked through this room, younger, quicker to theories, still believing that clarity always followed persistence. But the case remained a shadow in his career, a shape he could describe but never hold. Evidence was inconclusive. Interviews went nowhere. Every potential motive dissolved into uncertainty, and Aurelia, bright, solitary Aurelia, remained a question without an answer. Tonight, the room feels closer, smaller, as if waiting for him. The edges of memory sharpen, a stack of photos on the table, the sound of her neighbor's hesitant voice during the initial report, the way the dusk light fell across her front window that night. He remembers leaving the scene back then with a quiet sense of failure he didn't yet understand. He moves gently across the floor. The dust swirls like thin ghosts around his boots. His flashlight slides across the cracked lampshade again. He had noted it once, dismissed it as incidental, the result of a simple fall. Now it seems different. Not louder, not clearer, but more intentional. Time has a way of reshaping what the mind ignored. Aurelia's file remains open on the old desk where he placed it earlier. Her picture stares back, a soft but firm gaze, hair tied back loosely, eyes reflecting the open spaces she often captured. There had been something about her silence, calm, yes, but also aware. She seemed like someone who saw more than she spoke aloud. Vale steps closer to the window, remembering how the night air smelled that summer, warm, dry, laced with sagebrush. He can almost hear the faint rustle of leaves outside. The ache of unfinished work settles deeper into his ribs. Something is here, he tells himself. Something he missed. The room waits. He exhales, steadying himself. The past begins to stir. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. It started with a box. Cardboard, unmarked, dropped anonymously at the Moriarty substation 2 weeks earlier. Inside lay a single item, a memory card, old and scratched, labeled only with the date 7/14/06, the night Aurelia died. The officer on duty had nearly dismissed it as a prank until the timestamp aligned with the cold case. When the files were opened, the images revealed sequences Aurelia had taken mere hours before her death. Landscape shots of dusk settling over the foothills, a lone dirt road stretching toward a distant ridge, a blurred figure in the near distance, so faint it could be mistaken for dust on the lens. But on the final image, her camera had captured something unexpected, the shadow of a second person at the edge of the frame. Not facing the camera but present, shoulders slightly hunched, head turned just enough to suggest awareness of her. The discovery forced the department to acknowledge what had been overlooked. There had been someone with her that night, someone never identified, someone who had stood close enough to be caught by accident in her last sequence of photographs. A review of evidence followed. Files long untouched were stacked across desks, and Vale's supervisor, a man not given to dramatics, called him in with a brief, quiet instruction. "You led it once. You finish it now." Vale accepted without hesitation. He carried the box home that night, the weight of it unfamiliar yet strangely welcome. He spent hours examining the images, studying their composition, their timestamps, their subtle shifts in exposure. Aurelia had photographed landscapes professionally. Her technique was deliberate. Nothing about the sequence felt accidental, not even the blurred figure. And then there was the memory card itself. Old, yes, but clean, too clean. Someone kept it all these years. Someone knew its significance. Someone timed its return. Now, standing once again inside Aurelia's home, Vale replays the chain of events. He studies the corners of the room as if waiting for the photographs to match something physical here. The discovery of the memory card shifts everything. It suggests presence, intent, proximity. It transforms the story from quiet tragedy to unanswered confrontation. He approaches the table where Aurelia's equipment used to sit. The surface still shows faint indentations where her tripods once rested. Her neighbors had said she often cleaned her gear meticulously after returning from assignments. But that night, her bag was open, lenses scattered. It never made sense. Until now. If she returned home and discovered she had captured an unexpected figure in her frames, she may have reviewed her shots immediately. She may have recognized something, someone. She may have confronted it. Vale closes his eyes for a moment, letting the flicker of possibility settle. Everything about the room feels sharper now, as if finally stepping into focus. He walks toward the window again. Outside, the world is dark, the desert stretching silently under a thin moon. A cold breeze pushes through the cracks in the frame, stirring a faint scent of dust and juniper. He imagines Aurelia standing here, reviewing her images, realizing she wasn't alone that evening, realizing someone had followed her home. The memory card, missing from the original evidence, had been the hole in the story. Now returned, it reopens everything. It invites questions that were never asked. Why send it now? Why anonymously? Why at all? Vale feels the familiar weight of responsibility tighten around his shoulders. The case is alive again, not due to chance, but because someone chose to revive it. He surveys the room one more time. The early details, the cracked lampshade, the overturned chair, the quiet marks on the floor take on new meaning. The past edges closer, no longer dormant but whispering. Something had happened here that night, something careful, something controlled. The truth is no longer still, it has begun to move. 3. Investigator examines, past reports to identify overlooked details. Back at the station, Vale sits under the dim, fluorescent glow of the archive room, surrounded by the artifacts of unfinished work. The hum of old lights fills the silence, steady and low, as if the building itself is breathing in restraint. Aurelia's case file lies open before him, pages yellowed at the edges, staple marks from long-removed documents, handwritten notes, some his own, in the margin. He begins reading with the patience of someone unraveling a thread. Every line, every timestamp, every statement, not searching for what was seen, but for what wasn't. The initial scene report mentions no signs of forced entry, yet the front door had been unlocked when responders arrived. Aurelia never left doors unlocked, according to her sister's statement. That detail had been dismissed as oversight, exhaustion from travel. But now, with the memory card in hand, the unlocked door feels intentional. Next is the neighbor's account. Heard something light, maybe a thud around 10:30 p.m. didn't sound like trouble. Vale reads the line twice. Back then, the neighbor had been anxious, uncertain, wording soft around memory. Now he sees the hesitancy, a gap perhaps born of not wanting to assume the worst. A field report from the forensic technician catches his attention. A brief note about a partial fingerprint on Aurelia's window frame, indeterminate, smudged, ultimately inconclusive. The print had been logged, then dismissed as likely belonging to Aurelia herself. Vale frowns. The technician had been new, fatigued, working through multiple scenes that week. The print had never been matched or cross-referenced again. He sets it aside. Next, he moves through interview transcripts. Coworkers described Aurelia as disciplined, private, gentle with her work but distant from most people. One colleague mentioned she kept detailed journals of her assignments. Those journals had been collected, but only one had been reviewed. The rest were boxed and stored without further examination. Vale stands, retrieves the box from the evidence shelf. He lays the journals out one by one, 12 of them, spanning 3 years of field work. He flips through pages filled with sketches, notes about lighting conditions, terrain descriptions, weather patterns. Each entry is methodical, almost meditative. But in the journal from the month of her death, something shifts. Her handwriting becomes tighter, shorter entries, sparse mentions of a figure she noticed near one of her shooting locations. She never described the person directly, only referring to them as the observer. A quiet presence she sensed more than saw. Vale reads the line again. The observer again today, at the ridge, doesn't approach, only watches. He flips the page. Road dust lifted twice. Someone else was there. Another page. Shadow in the frame. Didn't see anyone afterward. He aligns the journal entries with the images recovered from the memory card. Dates match. Times align. Aurelia wasn't imagining someone nearby. She documented it. He exhales slowly. Next, Vale reviews the original autopsy report. Cause of death listed as blunt force trauma, angle consistent with an unexpected fall or impact. No defensive wounds. No clear indication of struggle, but a single line stands out now. Injury patterns not fully consistent with self-inflicted fall or singular accidental event. The phrasing had seemed ambiguous at the time. Now it seems cautious, an observation not fully pursued. He reaches for a folder labeled miscellaneous. Inside lie small items. A broken strap from her camera bag, a piece of dried mud collected from her doorstep, and a disposable glove containing a pebble she carried during hikes. None appeared useful back then. But the dried mud, Vale pulls it closer. The sample was taken because of unusual texture. The note reads, "Contains traces of soil not typical to residential area, possibly from a trail or hillside." He remembers ignoring that detail. Mud can travel easily, boots, tires, simple movement, but the sequence of new evidence forces him to reconsider everything. He stacks the journal beside the images, the figure in the frame, the shadow in the journal, the unlocked door, the smudged fingerprint, the overlooked soil. Pieces, once unrelated, now begin to lean toward one another. Vale closes his eyes. The room hums. The air tastes of old paper and the faint chemical tang of aging files. Somewhere in these pages is the truth he missed, the truth someone waited 14 years to bring back. He breathes in, quiet, steady. The past is ready to be seen again. The list begins quietly, without flourish, names resurfacing from a case that had long drifted into stillness. Vale writes them down in the measured, deliberate script of someone who refuses to rush the fragile weight of truth. Suspect 1, Daniel Rusk. Aurelia's former colleague, a field assistant who worked with her 2 years before her death. Their partnership dissolved without public conflict, but interviews at the time noted his frustration with her independence. Rusk had wanted to co-author a series she believed should be credited to her alone. Their divergence was professional, but quiet resentment often grows in unlit corners. He had an alibi, camping with a small group near Sakaro. 3 confirmations, 1 logbook entry, a time-stamped purchase. Clean. Too clean, perhaps, but years have passed. Memories can align falsely under the pressure of certainty. Vale notes the possibility, but sets it aside without leaning too far in. Suspect 2, Myra Elland. Aurelia's neighbor, once friendly, later distant. Myra's interview transcript reveals a subtle tension, admiration tinged with envy. She had often commented on Aurelia's solitary routines, her quiet self-sufficiency, her work recognized in niche circles. Myra had no record, no history of conflict, no indication of harmful intent, but she lived closest. She heard the faint thud that night. She noticed Aurelia's car return. Proximity is a simple fact, but facts can be heavy when the surrounding narrative begins to bend. Her alibi, staying home reading. No witnesses, no time-stamped activity. Vale marks her as uncertain, not suspicious, just incomplete. Suspect 3, Jonah Callan. A park ranger stationed near Aurelia's last assignment area. Known to be helpful, calm, steady. He had assisted her with access to restricted zones before. Their interactions were cordial, professional. But in the journal entries, the observer appears repeatedly near locations Jonah frequented. When asked about those dates back in 2006, he said he had no memory of being near her shooting site at those exact times. His statement wasn't questioned further. His alibi for the night of her death had a peculiar vagueness, probably home. A single phrase that means nothing and everything. Vale underlines Jonah's name twice. Suspect 4, Elias Keene. A stranger to Aurelia's immediate circle, but cited in the original report. A land surveyor who worked along the foothills during the summer of 2006. He reported a brief exchange with Aurelia weeks before the incident, something about a boundary marker, a path she photographed that crossed land under reassessment. There was no recorded dispute, no sign of disagreement, but the mention was included because it was unusual. His alibi, working late at an office in Albuquerque. Validated by a supervisor's signature but lacking any technical verification. No digital logs, no emails, no measurable activity. Vale leans back. The room around him feels colder, quieter. The suspects form a loose constellation, faint lines connecting them through proximity, opportunity, or circumstantial friction. None are convincing yet. None can be dismissed. He reviews the blurred figure in Aurelia's final image, the outline indistinct, posture neutral, identity elusive. The shape offers no easy clue. Not tall, not short. Not definitive in any recognizable way, just present, unwanted, watching. And then Vale recalls the cracked lampshade in Aurelia's home, the angle suggesting it fell from a modest collision, not force. Something subtle, a presence, not a fight. He replays each suspect in his mind. Rusk with ambition, Myra with envy, Jonah with access, Elias with oversight. He flips through their interviews again. Not the words, those are predictable, but the silences, the brief pauses, the cautious distance. Interviews reveal more in hesitation than in speech. Rusk had paused when asked about their last conversation. Myra hesitated when recalling Aurelia's nightly habits. Jonah looked confused when asked about her journal entries, though he never saw them. Elias seemed relieved when his interview ended, too relieved for a minor incident. 4 names, 4 quiet stories, 4 clean surfaces with faint, almost invisible cracks. Vale rubs the back of his neck. The truth is somewhere here, but truth rarely shouts. It drifts in small movements, slow and deliberate, like desert wind reshaping sand over years. He exhales and begins again. 5 clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The first real shift comes from the soil sample. Vale brings the dried mud to the lab for reanalysis. Technology has matured since 2006. Instruments now detect subtler differences. The results return with a quiet revelation. The soil contains particulate material from a trail near the western ridge of the Manzano foothills, an area not directly connected to Aurelia's residence. But it is connected to someone else. Vale retrieves field access logs and cross-references ranger movement during that month. Jonah Callan's route included the western ridge. Not unusual on its own, but the particular composition, fine volcanic grit mixed with silt from seasonal runoff, matches a location rarely crossed except by staff or dedicated hikers. Aurelia had been there, Jonah had been there, the soil traveled home with someone. Vale keeps his reaction restrained. It's not proof, it's a thread pulled from silence. The next clue emerges from the journals. In one of the final entries, Aurelia writes, "Shadow again, doesn't feel threatening, only deliberate, not sure what they want." The word deliberate unsettles Vale. Intent changes everything. He compares the journal dates with Jonah's reported station logs. 2 align. The days she sensed the observer were days he listed vague assignments in his logbook, entries lacking detail. This doesn't prove anything, but it disrupts his alibi's comfort. Still, motive remains unclear. Jonah had no known conflict with Aurelia. Their interactions had been respectful. Vale moves on. A second inconsistency arises in the timeline from Myra's statement. She said she heard a thud around 10:30 p.m., but Aurelia's car was recorded entering her driveway at 9:58 p.m. Neighbors noted her lights turning on around 10:05 p.m. If the thud was connected, something happened 25 minutes after her return. Not immediately, not impulsively. The timing suggests a conversation, voluntary entry, or quiet presence before anything happened. This aligns with the lack of defensive wounds, a confrontation without resistance, something she didn't anticipate. Another detail resurfaces, the cracked lampshade. Its angle suggests it fell from a slight brush, not a struggle, a subtle imbalance, as if someone moved slightly too close or she reached for something quickly, causing a small shift. Vale flips through photographs of the room. One image catches his eye, the arrangement of her notes on the table. In the original scene, the pages were slightly askew, edges misaligned by a few centimeters. Aurelia's journals show her precision. She never left pages out of order. A subtle disruption, evidence of quiet tension. Then comes the photograph, the last image captured on the memory card. Vale studies it again, this time under enhanced resolution. The blurred figure at the edge of the frame wears something faintly reflective near the shoulder. A patch, a badge, or simply a strip of fabric catching light. Not clear enough to confirm, not enough to accuse, but enough to question. Suddenly, the emotional landscape of the suspects begins to shift. Rusk, professional resentment, but he was nowhere near the ridge. His timeline holds. Myra, personal envy. Her tension feels shallow, not sharp enough to lead to quiet confrontation. Jonah, access, overlap in location, unexplained presence. Emotional conflict unknown. But something subtle lives in the space between their field interactions, respect mixed with unspoken distance. Perhaps admiration, perhaps concern, perhaps something deeper, quieter, more complicated. Elia's boundary disputes, but no evidence of return contact. His alibi is soft but inert. Vale begins mapping the clues on a board. Soil sample lines, timeline gaps, journal entries, the blurred figure. Slowly, a pattern forms, delicate and unsettling. The inconsistencies converge around a single presence, not through guilt but through proximity, through quiet oversight, through unspoken familiarity. As he studies the arrangement, he realizes something devastatingly simple. Aurelia trusted the person who entered her home. The unlocked door. The lack of struggle. The quiet shift in the room. Whoever was with her that night was not a stranger who forced entry. It was someone she knew enough not to fear. Someone who stood quietly beside her, familiar enough to step inside without raising alarm. Vale's breath thins. A subtle detail clicks into place, one he overlooked years ago. In Myra's original statement, she said, "I saw her porch light turn on, thought she had a guest maybe." But during that period, Aurelia rarely had guests. So who would she open the door for at 10 p.m.? Who was familiar enough to be welcomed? Who had reason to approach her after hours? The answer isn't clear yet. But the circle around one suspect begins to tighten. Not through force, not through intent, through quiet human familiarity. The kind that leads to small, devastating truths. The investigation edges toward its next fracture. The final shift arrives quietly. No dramatic revelation, no sudden confession, just a small detail resurfacing from the silence of an old file. Vale returns to the evidence photos one more time, focusing on Aurelia's work desk. Among the scattered objects is a simple item, almost invisible, a folded paper towel beneath one of her lenses. It seems insignificant, something anyone might leave behind. But Aurelia was meticulous. She cleaned her equipment with cloths, not paper. She never used disposables. Her journal entries mention her preference for reusable materials, part of her environmental habits. So who placed the towel there? Vale retrieves the scene inventory. The paper towel wasn't logged separately, dismissed as environmental noise. But under magnification, the texture reveals something faint, a partial impression of a circular emblem. Not a full logo, just a curved line, a trace of ink. It takes Vale hours to cross-reference. The curve matches an emblem used on disposable paper towels distributed to regional ranger stations during the mid-2000s. Not definitive, but consistent. His thoughts returned to Jonah Callan. A ranger, a man with access, a man frequently near Aurelia's field sites, a man with vague logs, a man connected to the ridge soil found at her house. But motive still eludes him. He pulls out Jonah's old interview recording, listening to it with a patience sharpened by years of distance. Jonah's voice is steady, calm, but one line catches Vale differently this time. "She always worked alone. I admired that." It is spoken quietly, too quietly, not admiration, something closer to longing or respect sharpened by distance. Vale replays the line, slow, deliberate, waiting for something to emerge. Then he hears it, a faint shift in Jonah's breathing pattern when Aurelia's name is mentioned. Not guilt, hesitation, the kind of pause that comes from hiding something not harmful in intent but heavy in consequence. He pulls the journal entries again. Observer, silent watcher, deliberate presence. Not threatening, just present. Vale pictures the blurred figure in the final image, shoulders turned slightly, as though caught watching but unsure whether to step forward or retreat. A quiet presence. A hesitant one. Something clicks into place. Jonah wasn't following Aurelia out of malice. He had been watching over her, perhaps concerned for her safety, perhaps drawn to her calm, solitary nature. Someone who admired her from a distance but never crossed the boundary she maintained. It explains the lack of confrontation, the lack of struggle, the unlocked door. Aurelia likely recognized him immediately that night when he approached her home. She let him in. Vale's mind screens through the scene. The cracked lamp, the slight disarray, the subtle signs of movement, gentle, not violent. A conversation, maybe emotionally charged but still contained. What would cause the quiet to fracture? He studies the autopsy findings again. The angle of the fall, the singular impact, the absence of defensive marks. An accidental fall doesn't rule out another person being present. Aurelia may have stepped backward, reaching for something. Maybe she moved suddenly during a tense discussion. Maybe Jonah tried to warn her, or block her path, or steady her and failed. The truth, quiet and devastating, settles in Vale's mind. Aurelia's death was not planned, not violent, not born of anger or malice. It was an accident, born from someone who cared too much in silence. Jonah never confessed because he couldn't. It wasn't something he intended. It wasn't something he understood how to explain without unraveling himself. And because she trusted him, letting him inside without fear, the guilt became heavier than words could hold. Vale goes to Jonah's home. The man who opens the door is older now, lines deeper, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes carrying a tired softness shaped by years of quiet living. When he sees Vale, there is no surprise, only resignation. Not guilt. Recognition. Vale enters the modest house. No cuffs, no force, just a quiet conversation. "Tell me," Vale says, voice low. Jonah sits, hands clasped, his breath shallow. "I went to check on her," he finally says. "Not for any bad reason. She looked tired that day. I thought maybe she needed help carrying gear." His voice cracks slightly, not dramatic, just human. "I shouldn't have gone inside, but she opened the door. She wasn't upset, just distant." He explains it slowly, a quiet conversation, a misunderstanding, a moment of emotional tension. Aurelia stepped back, reaching for the lamp to stabilize herself. It fell. She slipped. The impact was catastrophic. "I panicked," he whispers. "I froze. I didn't know how to make sense of it." Vale listens without interruption. The truth fits. No contradictions, no embellishments. Just a man who carried an unbearable weight for years. "And the memory card?" Vale asks. Jonah closes his eyes. "I kept it. I didn't know why. Maybe because it was the last thing she recorded. Maybe because I didn't want it lost." "Why send it now?" A long silence follows. "Because someone needed to finish her story." Vale sits back. The air feels heavy, not with accusation but with the quiet weight of inevitability. The least suspected person, the helpful ranger, the gentle presence, the man with no apparent conflict, became the center of the tragedy not through malice, but through a fragile moment where concern collided with circumstance. The twist is simple, logical, devastating. Not a villain. A mistake. A human one. The truth feels colder than guilt. Vale stands. Jonah doesn't resist as he is led outside. No struggle, no plea, just acceptance. The desert wind carries dust across the ground, as if folding the past gently into itself. 7 ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. The case closes with a quiet finality that doesn't feel like victory. Vale files the last document, sealing a story that took 14 years to unfold, not through new science or clever deduction, but through patience, silence, and the return of a memory card that refused to disappear. He walks out of the station, evening light stretching long shadows across the pavement. The air carries the faint scent of dust, the kind that settles on old roads and forgotten places. The world feels unchanged, yet Aurelia's story lingers like a thin imprint across the quiet. Jonah will face the legal process, a system built to classify intent, assign consequence, determine punishment. But Vale knows the edges of truth don't always fit neatly into the compartments justice requires. Aurelia's death wasn't born of hatred or rivalry. It was a fracture, small, sudden, irreversible. A single moment where hesitation and misstep shaped the weight of an entire future. Truth is rarely sharp and clear. More often, it drifts beneath the surface, quiet and unnoticed until someone gathers the patience to lift it into light. Motives aren't always sinister. Actions aren't always clean. People carry emotions they never articulate, and sometimes those unspoken currents shape outcomes more than intention ever could. At the edge of the parking lot, Vale pauses. He thinks of Aurelia's journals, pages filled with landscapes, observations, quiet reflections. She noticed the details others missed. She moved through the world with deliberate stillness. Perhaps she sensed Jonah's quiet presence more deeply than he ever understood. Perhaps the observer in her journals wasn't a threat at all, but someone she could not entirely decipher. Vale exhales, letting the evening settle. Justice feels mechanical, necessary, structured, procedural. But the truth beneath this case is human, filled with silence, error, and fragile intention. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just life unfolding the way it often does, quietly, unpredictably, without clarity until long after the moment has passed. He walks toward his car. The sky dims into muted colors, soft and expansive. The kind of landscape Aurelia would have photographed, gentle, contemplative, unassuming in its beauty. The case is solved, the file is closed. But something human remains untouched, lingering in the quiet spaces between fact and memory. Vale doesn't try to define it. Some truths are meant to stay a little blurred.